Did you know? Two Men and a Truck has performed 5.5 million moves to date. Or Dawn Food Products, the customer service staff at their international home office in Jackson, Michigan, speaks over 15 different languages. These are just some of the ways Michigan's pioneers started out as small companies with big ideas. This spirit of entrepreneurism is the foundation for a rich and prosperous future. We are the business leaders for Michigan.
Provided by Delta. And you have been watching Governor Snyder's State of the State address. I'm Christy McDonald. Thanks so much for joining us for this special live edition of MiWeek. Joining me now are MiWeek contributors Nolan Finley of the Detroit News, Stephen Henderson of the Detroit Free Press for their quick impressions of the speech. We've been sitting here watching this the whole time. And gentlemen, I said before this started tonight, he's got to give the speech of his life. Nolan, did he do that?
I think he gave a good speech. I think the tone of the speech and his demeanor were right for the moment. And that's not easy for him. He's not an emotional man. He's a self-professed nerd. He's not comfortable showing emotion, showing anger. And tonight, he was the point of tears a couple of times. It was clear that this has moved him. And, I kept thinking, had he given this speech 6 weeks ago, none of this would be, we wouldn't be dealing with any of the condemnation we're dealing with right now, or he's dealing with.
Well, I think he still would have had some blowback, because I think he maybe should have given this, been on point way earlier than 6 weeks ago. A couple of phrases.
Well, whatever.
But a couple phrases that I want to pull out that he said, I'm sorry, most of all, that I let you down. You deserve better. You deserve accountability. And he ended up tonight saying it was hurtful to see the people who I work for hurt by the people who work for me.
Yeah.
Good ending.
Yeah, no, I think Nolan's right. If he had given this speech earlier, he wouldn't be seen as so distant from the people of Flint as he is now. I still haven't seen a picture of the governor with people in Flint, the people who are suffering.
Oh, why not? He was up there Friday and he didn't tell the media. why didn't he do that?
I don't know why he's not doing that. I think he's had a real hard time connecting. But at least, you got to look at the words of this speech, as you said. Mm-hmm. He takes responsibility here. He apologizes. He says the buck for this stops with me. He apologized for it. He outlined a plan to try to deal with it. I still think you need more. I think you need more money. I think you need a lot more money committed to this. I think you ought to put somebody in charge very publicly to manage this.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody
and
who
that's what Obama did today.
Right. That's somebody who has credibility in Flint and other places like that, because the governor does not. I think those are things that should have been done. Releasing the emails, that's a good move.
Yeah, when he announced that, the three of us went, okay,
not quite far enough.
Now here we go. This is something that we'll be able to take a look at tomorrow.
Why just 2014 and 15? Why not 2013? That's going to be a question. Also, is it just his, or is it also his chief of staff? Is it the other people in the office? Those things need to be answered. And why not just come out and say, this exemption that I have from FOIA doesn't make any sense.
And it doesn't.
Change that.
Most other states don't
issue.
have that.
Right.
And it covers him, it covers the legislature, and it's just wrong in today's world.
It doesn't make any sense.
Another thing that I want to talk about is he also went through the timeline, and he went, said, I'm going to take you back how everything happened. I want to go through that. I want to talk a little bit about also coming up the DEQ and what happens here, because he really seems to distance himself that it was all them. It was all of their fault, essentially.
Well, I've never seen an executive do that to a department publicly. Nobody who elected Rick Snyder governor cares that the DEQ didn't get his memo about change. He said that earlier today, and that's not the point. The point is you're in charge. We elected you to make sure that government works. You also sold yourself as somebody who could make government work, who understood how to run it efficiently, and in fact, that's turned out not to be the case.
That's true, but I think the people ought to know that there were a lot of culpable parties here.
Sure.
And a decision maker is only as good as the information he's given. And he sold himself as a manager. This is a management issue. It's on him, but he was really served poorly by this department. It's entrenched way of doing things. It's stubbornness. It's incompetence. The water department of Flint, the chemists there should have known to add the phosphates. The EPA, there are a lot of culpable parties, and I think he was right to let people know it wasn't just his mistakes and his malfeasance.
All right, we're going to look specifically at his plan and some of the things that he thinks is going to help out here. And he also talked about DPS to try the public schools and what he wants to have as initiatives in this next year as well. We're going to talk about that. We're going to continue our analysis of the governor's address, but we do want to bring you the Democrats' response given by the House Democratic leader, Tim Grimel of Auburn Hills. Take a listen.
Hi, I'm House Democratic leader Tim Grimel. I'm talking to you from Michigan's capital, the People's House. Tonight, you've had a chance to hear the governor lay out his priorities for Michigan. Now, I'd like to talk to you about our vision of creating an economic future that works for Michigan's middle-class families. Thanks to the hard work of families across our state, our economy has pulled itself out of some of the most difficult times we've ever seen. But we know our state can do better than it's done under this Republican legislature. We need to focus on making Michigan's economy work for everyone, not just the wealthy. First, we have to change how Lansing does business. We know people are frustrated with a system that doesn't look out or work for them. We hear every day how Republicans in Lansing have failed Michigan's middle-class families. The most tragic example of that is the Flint water crisis. Lansing failed in one of its most basic functions, ensuring the well-being and health of our citizens. It seems like a story we'd hear about from some third world country, not the Great Lakes state, home of the world's largest freshwater reserves. Republican politicians and bureaucrats endangered the health of thousands of children by allowing them to drink unsafe water, saving a couple of bucks at the expense of children's health. Thousands of parents are terrified for their children, and they rightly want answers on how this could have possibly happened. The recent news of 10 deaths due to Legionnaire's disease is even more alarming. And because Flint's water system has been so tragically mishandled, it's unclear what other health risks may still exist. What is clear is that we need answers on the lasting effects this decision has had on the residents of Flint. Unfortunately, Republicans in the legislature are taking a pass on holding the administration accountable for it. It's disgraceful. The Capitol View boondoggle is another example of Lansing not working for Michigan's middle-class families, but instead for wealthy donors. In that fiasco, Lansing Republicans failed to look out for the pocketbooks of middle-class families. Republicans in the legislature decided to spend $134 million on a new taxpayer-funded office building for lawmakers owned by a wealthy Republican donor. That's right. At the same time Republicans told us we couldn't afford to restore funds to schools or make better decisions about Flint water, they okayed $134 million so that politicians could get a view of the Capitol, and at the same time gave a massive handout to wealthy donors. So what made it possible for these things to happen? It's the lack of transparency and accountability in Michigan's state government. Last year, Michigan was rated worst in the nation for government transparency. We need to change this, and it needs to happen now. Democrats want more transparency and more accountability, and we've introduced legislation to achieve exactly that. We've introduced a plan to bring the governor's office and legislators under the Michigan Freedom of Information Act, making everything we do visible and accessible to the public. When it comes to campaigns, we believe there should be more transparency and less unaccountable dark money. We support more campaign finance reporting so that you know exactly who's paying for all those commercials trying to influence your vote. Our bill to have members of the legislature and top administration officials disclose their personal financials is something so basic, even Washington requires it. Passing that law would ensure accountability and prevent conflicts of interest. Yet instead of passing these common sense bills, Republicans have blocked them from even coming to a vote because they're more interested in looking out for themselves than they are in doing what's right. So what could we do if we fixed Lansing? We could focus on the real priorities for helping Michigan's middle class. Education has always been a key for helping middle-class families get ahead. That's more true now than ever before in our global economy. where we're not only competing with California and Ohio for jobs, but with Germany and China. Education should inspire innovation, which is essential to the success of small businesses and the overall economy. We need to strengthen all parts of our education system so that every child has an opportunity to succeed and every family has a chance to prosper right here in Michigan. It starts by making sure that pre-K education is universal so our kids can get the start they need to be successful. And it continues by ensuring our schools have the resources needed to keep class sizes small, ensuring your children get the attention they deserve. Forcing educators and school administrators to be smarter with our approach to standardized tests so we can ensure quality standards, but also allow our teachers the flexibility they need to teach every child according to the best way they learn. We also have to end Lansing's lip service when it comes to education after high school. Looking at our competitors across the country and around the world, we see that in places where a commitment to post-high school education is a priority, the middle class is getting ahead instead of falling behind. We must do a better job in creating educational opportunities after high school for our children. Educational opportunities that will lead to an economic future where at the end of the month, the talk around the kitchen table isn't dominated by what to cut or what to go without, but rather what to do with the extra money families have after paying bills. We're fortunate to have outstanding institutions in Michigan, such as community colleges, universities, and apprenticeship programs. But Lansing has fallen down on the job of making these programs affordable for middle-class families. That's why we are proposing a tuition freeze at all state-supported community colleges and universities. We simply must make our post-high school educational programs accessible and affordable to everyone who seeks an education and a path to a better future. That doesn't mean smoke and mirror financing that leaves families holding the bag. Let's be honest. At the end of the day, a six-figure loan for college is still hundreds of thousands of dollars burdening families, no matter how supposedly good the terms of the loan are. Real affordability means working to stop pricing education out of reach for middle-class families. At the same time that we're making education affordable, we also have to do a better job of harnessing the economic power of colleges and universities. We must create more partnerships between them and businesses, increase incentives to moving research out of the labs and into the real world, and empower the spin-off of innovative small business startups. This will not only give our students the skills and experience that they need to drive Michigan's 21st century economy, it will also create a market here at home for better paying jobs. I want to emphasize that last part. We have to create better paying jobs right here in Michigan for our families. Jobs that will help families do more than just get by, but will actually help families get ahead. Jobs that will help close the pay gap between men and women, ensure that skilled trades are paid a fair wage, and help parents save up for their kids' college education. Jobs that build on our core strengths, while at the same time positioning us for success in the future. We hope you will join us as we continue to fight for a new focus on different priorities. Priorities that make government transparent and accountable so that we can stop the wasteful spending and create an education and business environment that will power a new economy that works for everyone, not just the wealthy. Thank you for your time.
From Tim Greimel from Auburn Hills. All right, guys, let's go back to the governor's speech and I guess the tone that he gave out tonight. Nolan, how would you characterize it?
I think it was a very heartfelt tone, and as we said earlier, he spoke with an emotion, a passion you don't often see from a guy who describes himself as a nerd. I mean, I wrote for tomorrow, his instinct is to reach for a calculator and not a handkerchief. You know, he's a numbers guy, and the human piece of this job sometimes he's not as comfortable with. The sort of interplay with the public and his residents, the I feel your pain lip biting, that's not his style.
Well, now, if he set the right tone tonight, and you're saying he set the right tone, and we've been watching on social media seem to think that he's coming across as sincere. Stephen, let me ask you this. Now, he's got to back that up with actions.
He does, and he's got to do more than what he even said in the speech. I mean, Flint is not, Flint is not a $30 million problem.
I know. So let's talk about that. That 28.5
he said
million
30 in the speech, but it is 28.5.
And looking at what he's going to do to back up. So they're looking at hiring more school nurses. They're looking at some water system needs for $5.5 million, $17 million for bottled water.
That's the short term. That's the special appropriation out of the 2016 budget. Next couple of weeks, early in February, he releases his 2017 budget. I suspect that will contain hundreds of millions of dollars for Flint. What I'm hearing is they're going to use much of this $500 and some million dollar surplus they have for Flint. And so I think the real
use
test.
some of it for DPS, though.
They'll have
No,
to.
they'll have to.
I mean, we'll see. I mean, there's other places to get that money.
Can't spend a dollar twice.
But regardless, I think the real test of his response, his commitment, will come in that budget address. No one should walk away thinking 28.5 million and we're out of here. It's going to take a lot of money. He understands that. That was to get things underway.
Right. But what about that rainy day fund? Because I think if there's ever a rainy day that you needed to tap into, it might be Flint on the one hand, and you just brought up DPS, which we will get to a little later on in the show. What about tapping into that?
I mean, I think for Flint, that makes a lot of sense. This is an emergency. That's what that's for. Yeah. The other thing, though, that the rainy day fund does is by having that cash on hand, you lower the cost of borrowing, not just for the state, but for every municipality in the state of Michigan. And so you're always balancing that need against sort of your immediate funding needs. But Flint, I think there's no question you would dip into that.
Unless there's other places to get the money. You don't want to dip into the rainy day fund and have it cost you money up the road. I mean, if they have to pay a higher interest rate on the money they borrow, there's less money to operate. So if he can do this out of the surplus, if he can divert money from other places, unfortunately, will it come from roads? Will it come from schools? Will it come from other urgent needs?
Well, that's an interesting
So taking a much bigger step back here and putting this all in context, bigger context, there are some things that we did that took money out of the Treasury early in this administration that, again, that I've said before, need to be looked at. For the degree to which they were done. Did we need to give business as much of a tax cut as we gave them? Given the other things that are on the table now that cost us money, is that a responsible way to manage the government? I mean, I think these are the things that we got to talk about as well. You listen to him talk about not only Flint needing all of these things, but the infrastructure needs statewide. You were talking about tens and tens of billions of dollars that we need. Was this the time to be saying, well, we can get by with less by cutting business taxes, and to the extent that we did? I think it's a conversation they have to have in Lansing. The fact that it never comes up, the fact that the Republican majority always says, well, no, we had to do that, we had no choice, without debate, is irresponsible.
Except you have to look at the results, and Michigan has
slowly, faster than the rest of the nation.
It is absolutely outpacing the nation. It has created jobs. It has come back from being the worst state in the nation by every economic measure to being among the top third in most economic measures. He had to do something dramatic to bring people, and the whole narrative about Michigan and its business climate has changed. I think we go back to those days at great risk. You cannot slow down this economic engine.
Not an either.
And because that produces tax revenue, Steve. Growth produces revenue.
So the fair assessment of the tax shift that was effected in the first year of his administration, the fair assessment of it is that it has created no more jobs over the last 5 years than anything else would have. That's absolutely true. We've bounced back.
True. Look where we were for a decade when we had the opposite policies.
But the national economy has recovered in a way that has helped our job
But when
numbers.
the national economy was growing in the years before 2008, we were going like this. We were in a single state recession. are no longer out of line with the nation, and in fact,
but that recession was over by the time he took office.
It's still, Steve, not our recession wasn't over by the time he took office. We were still
the single
losing
state
jobs.
Recession was there was a national recession though.
Yeah,
that's different.
But we had joined the rest of the nation. Had we not changed, the rest of the nation
the
would
last
have
year of
recovered,
Jennifer
and we
Granholm's
wouldn't have.
the last year of Jennifer Granholm's administration, we saw the job numbers bounce back.
They didn't bounce back.
They sure
Steve.
did. Absolutely.
They never bounced back.
So the first year of
they're not bounced back.
Okay.
Yet.
So the first year that he was in office, we saw the job growth that we've seen sustained over time, right? That can't be due to the tax changes because they didn't take effect for a full year.
You cannot deny the impact of change policies when the policies they reversed had led us into such a hole for so long.
But had bounced back.
All right, I'm gonna pull you out a little bit of the weeds. I'm gonna pull you a little bit back to Flint, and I want to talk about the role of leadership. And now we're seeing the mayor emerge with more of a voice here, and she's getting a little bit more responsibility and power back. And she was just in Washington today and meeting with the president. Do you think that she'll be able to, with the addition of some other things, change his mind to change the declaration to a federal disaster, Nolan?
I don't know about that. I mean, there's some specific...
To be able to get more funding.
Yeah, there's some specific criteria for that. The administration seems to think Flint doesn't meet that. I think this mayor's done a good job. I really do. And she has resisted jumping into the partisan fray. She showed a willingness not to blame, to work with the governor. I really am impressed with her performance.
What do you think, Stephen?
I don't know whether she'll convince the president to make it a federal disaster. I think that's something of a long shot. I think when this was, again, missed opportunity. If you had done this when they discovered in October, for instance, that they still were hooked up to this system that was poisoning kids, you might have had a shot at federal disaster relief then. Now that you've switched back and it's sort of cleaning up the problem, I'm not sure that you get that. I mean, I think she has to emerge as a really strong voice for her city, advocating not just here but in Washington for more help, because they're going to need it. I mean, there's no way.
And that's a pretty large role for the mayor of Flint that has not characteristically been there in the past 15, 20 years.
That's right.
Let me ask you this, though. I want to go back to the emails that are going to be released tomorrow. Nolan, what are you hoping to see there, or what are you expecting to see there?
I don't think we have any idea, but I do think if the governor is telling, was square with us tonight about what he knew and when and how he responded, the email should back them up. But I would be interested to see the interaction between the bureaucracy and the administrative staff, between the administration and these departments. How much information were they getting, and what were these folks saying? What were they telling the governor and his top aides?
Did the governor really have no choice, but that he obviously had a choice, but to say, look, I'm coming clean, I'm responsible, here, go ahead and take a look at my email?
Well, I mean, we wrote a big editorial on Sunday in the Free Press saying that this is what he ought to do, release these emails. And, it's not about, it's not about emotion or some sort of rhetorical flourish. There are specific things that will be explicated by looking at his emails, specific things that are unclear in the chain of emails we now have that you can't make sense of unless you see the other side of the conversation. And so I think he understands that. I think there's also a tremendous amount of pressure. It wasn't just our editorial. Lots of people have called for those emails to be released. And so
I think
maybe he didn't have a choice.
I mean, I think we need to see the emails between the emergency manager, Darnell Early, and the water department.
Sure.
I think we need to see every bit of paperwork regarding the decisions in the water department not to add phosphates to that water. Everybody you talk to says, hey, that was crazy. That's
Everybody
standard
knew you had to
procedure,
do it.
and it wasn't that expensive. That's not a decision that come out of the governor's office. That's a chemist or the officials in that water department making that call. What were they thinking?
So there was a huge crowd outside of the Capitol tonight while the governor was giving his State of the State address, and there are multiple recall efforts to get the governor out of office. This is a governor tonight who spoke. He's not resigning from everything that he said tonight. Do you believe that the recall efforts will be successful in some way?
No. I mean, that's a pretty high bar to gather enough signatures to get a recall on the ballot. I think it's an ill-advised effort. I think if anybody's going to fix this thing, Snyder's got the biggest stake in fixing it. It's his reputation at stake. I think, he has been chastised. I think he has hurt his own political future, but I think he's the guy to stay here and fix this crisis.
Is the recall effort short-sighted, in your opinion, Stephen?
I think a recall is fine. I mean, if voters want to sign the petitions to have a recall election and we go through that process, then that's the process. I mean, that is part of the democratic process in this state. I think a resignation is more problematic. Number one, you don't elect somebody to try to tell them not to do the job. You elect somebody to hold them accountable, even when they make horrible, awful mistakes, to do your job. This is what you were elected to do. You've got to do it. We're going to make sure you do it. The other thing is, politically, a resignation doesn't achieve any of the things that the people who want him to resign want done. It makes Brian Calley the governor of Michigan for the next 3 years, which would be a very powerful position for him to run for that job in 2018. Democrats weren't able to muster a good enough candidate to beat Rick Snyder with a 45% approval rating in 2014. I don't know what the prospects would be in 2018 of them beating a Brian Calley, who would have a very cooperative legislature, because I think he's more in line with this legislature than Rick Snyder is. Resignation is, I think, a cop-out. It lets him off the hook, and it doesn't get us anywhere.
But look, Rick Snyder showed a commitment tonight to get this right, to roll up his sleeves and do this. I think all.
Well, now he has to show it.
Yeah,
saying it was one thing.
He absolutely does, and I think he'll give it his best. Politicizing this, calling for the resignation, continuing to exploit it for partisan advantage and opportunism does not help the people of Flint or Michigan. I would have liked to seen Tim Grimel stand up there and saying, "Look, the governor screwed up for sure, but at least for the legislative Democrats, we're going to work with him to get this right in Flint. We're going to stop the bickering that keeps us from getting anything done in Lansing and get this right."
So it's not bickering that keeps us from getting stuff done in Lansing. I mean, Democrats are out of power in Lansing in a way that makes them largely irrelevant in most of these debates. The problem in Lansing is a Republican majority in the legislature that's far more radical than the Republican governor, and he's weak in the way he deals with them. They do whatever they want to do.
They have differing agendas. Let me point out that this was a very unique speech because he spent about 25 minutes talking about the Flint water crisis. Then he spent 10 minutes talking about DPS. Then the back 10 minutes of the speech, and, it's funny. It was other stuff. I think people tuned out a little bit to that, or it was lost on the other initiatives that he was talking about. But I do want to spend this last 5 minutes talking about DPS and where this is going to go. I mean, never have you seen before a governor who has two major issues on his plate now for the next year.
And inextricably linked now, because they both deal with the welfare of children and
a trust factor.
And the incompetent management of the state. And I think they're now one and the same issue. DPS has got to be dealt with. It's got to be dealt with soon. That district will be insolvent by April. But it's not just DPS, as Mayor Duggan pointed out today. It's education across the state. Our schools are underperforming in every corner of this state. And I think we haven't come to accept that. Most parents don't realize that. We have some of the worst schools in the nation across the state. It can't be a Detroit-only fix. It's got to be a comprehensive fix.
And I think it was interesting because Governor Snyder recognized Mayor Duggan, who was in the audience there tonight. And in the last week, Duggan has been very upfront and very much into DPS and talking with the teachers, meeting with the teachers over the weekend, making sure the building inspectors are now going in and inspecting all of these schools. What kind of major role?
He's been playing the role of a politician. Which is one of the things that Governor Rick Snyder really still doesn't understand.
Well, what do you think in terms of making sure that Mike Duggan and Rick Snyder are on the same page and pushing the same DPS agenda? And how close do you think that they are right now?
Yeah, I don't know how close they are. I think this issue with the Detroit Education Commission not being part of the bills, that's a huge problem. That's a huge problem for Mike Duggan, because he understands that so many of the problems we have in Detroit are that related to the fact that you just open a school whenever you want, wherever you want, and not have to be accountable for that.
They're closer than they've been. Duggan met with the Detroit delegation this afternoon to push the governor's plan to push the legislation. I believe the Detroit delegation has to get behind this, has to lead on this. If you expect outstate lawmakers to vote for a $500 million debt relief plan for the Detroit city schools, Detroit delegation has to be behind it. They've got to lead on it.
But the two issues that concern them are, again, this education commission and
the school board.
But it sounds like Snyder's going to separate the debt from the restructuring.
You know, but I also think it's interesting. It's a timing thing as well. I mean, they're running out of time. I mean, obviously April, but do you think that there's going to be that? Well, they have been out of time for the last 2 years. Let's be honest. In the last minute that we have left here, last word on what you think we're going to see in terms of political push for DPS.
I mean, I think the governor's got to pull out all the stops, but I think he's so weak after the last year where the Republican majority scuttled the roads plan that he wanted, came up with a very poor compromise, and then passed a bunch of legislation that he said he didn't want, and he went ahead and signed it anyway. Where's his leverage to make them do anything?
Last word, Nolan.
There's no choice. The debt belongs to the state. The state's going to pay it one way or the other. I'm still convinced that they'll end up filing for bankruptcy, but in the end, the state still pays.
All right. Well, we are going to continue to talk about the governor's state of the state as the week goes on, and once we, again, see those emails that he plans to release tomorrow regarding the Flint water crisis. All right. Thanks, gentlemen. That's going to do it for our coverage of the governor's address tonight. Make sure you join us back here on MiWeek this Thursday night at 7:30 for an entire look at the speech, Where Things Stand Now. And you can always find us at MiWeek.org. I'm Christy McDonald. For all of us at Detroit Public TV, have a great night. We'll see you soon.
Did you know Gordon Food Service was started by a 23-year-old entrepreneur as a butter and egg delivery business more than a century ago? In 1948, school teacher Gerard Wendell Hayworth borrowed $10,000 from his parents to start a woodworking operation in his family's garage. It's now Hayworth Incorporated. These are just some of the ways Michigan's pioneers started out as small companies with big ideas. We are the business leaders for Michigan.
This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and